Welcome back everyone, this is the Chief Chocobo Alan back here with another Media Moogle review. Today we are taking a look at the early access action JRPG visual novel hybrid, Eternal Radiance. This title was developed and published by Visual Noveler. This interesting genre mashup will feature the first 3 chapters upon release, averaging out to about 8 to 12 hours of playtime, with an expected total of 11 chapters to complete the entire story. The story of this game centers around Celeste, a young squire, as she sets out on her initiation test to become a full-fledged knight in her order. To do so, she must travel across the continent and retrieve a mysterious artifact coming from the great Alchiem Empire. With little known about the artifacts or the Alchiem Empire themselves, it is up to Celeste and her order to locate, acquire, and investigate these artifacts in order to keep the local monsters from running amok. Just as the young squire risks life and limb to secure the artifact amidst rampaging goblins, slimes, and other monsters, a young thief shows up, takes the artifact, and scurries away. This truly kicks off the adventure. Celeste is not alone in this journey though, as she eventually teams up with 2 other companions in their quest to bring back the artifact and uncover a more sinister threat lurking in the shadows. This game itself is essentially broken down into 2 sections. You have a visual novel and an RPG-style dungeon area. While the developers presented this title as an action RPG, it's more like 75% visual novel and 25% action RPG. Having said that, I honestly enjoyed the visual novel approach to this title. Rather than explore villages and trying to find quests or shopkeepers, the game presents all of those elements as a story with a choose-your-own-adventure element thrown into the mix. The character designs are gorgeous, truly capturing the JRPG aesthetic to the point where this title felt like I was playing a novelization of the Tales series. If that isn't a grandiose compliment, then I don't know what is. I truly enjoyed the dialogue choices that this game gives you, as deviating off the beaten path will at times reward you with additional side quests, items, or armor. This caught me by surprise, as I just expected the dialogue to be the typical heroic or anti-hero style responses, and having the option to be rewarded for calling a character out for their own behavior, or even have NPCs push back on your own shenanigans, was a nice touch. The latter portion of this title consists of traversing open-world dungeons akin to the Neptunia series, with a combat system taken right out of the Kingdom Hearts. You know those hidden items and armor that you can get from exploring the dialogue trees? Well, you're going to want to have those, as combat here is a bit unbalanced and at times unforgiving. The controls with combat are fine for the most part, and the talent tree system does allow you to optimize your playstyle for ranged, melee, and defensive boosts, all of which are essential if you want to survive this adventure. I have mixed feelings about the combat. On one hand, the Kingdom Hearts style was very familiar and easy to pick up on. On the other hand, some enemy types are just broken. Basically, like they take way too much damage to kill, or they do way too much damage in single hits. And at times this made combat not enjoyable in the beginning part of the game. The bosses are fine, they have distinct patterns that are easy enough to figure out, and after a couple of defeats, you'll blaze right through them. However, many of the larger enemies in the dungeon overworld tend to be just too powerful, surrounded by too many grunts, or just have random amounts of damage, making the flow of combat more of a hindrance, and at times wanting to avoid combat altogether. The cardinal sin for me, though, with this, was the fact that much like the style of game that the title is emulating, if you die in the dungeon, you lose all progress, items, and levels you gain during the session. That is if you don't find the save points in each dungeon. Usually there are about 2 or 3 per dungeon. I wouldn't mind this so much if the enemies felt balanced, not so much of a chore to grind through. I found myself clearing screens and running back to the save point each time just to ensure progress was sustained. This wasn't a deal breaker for me, even when you have some enemies go down with a couple well-timed combos and others that just soak damage up like a sponge, but the constant loss of progress and running back and forth to the save point didn't endear me to the combat system in this game. Making matters worse is that you do not control your companions, and like an idiot, they tend to pull 2 or 3 roaming packs of monsters to them and by proxy you. And with how unbalanced some of the enemies are, and the difficulty in the early game, you're going to slam your controller down in frustration on more than one occasion. Trust me, I did quite a few times. I do believe that this game is intended to have a grind session between chapters and locations. However, upon release, I would encourage the developers to either bump up the XP monster's reward, or tone down the amount of HP of some of the larger goblins and crystal behemoths, and maybe tone down the amount of damage they deal out, because at times it was just physically impossible to handle 3 to 5 enemies at once, and that's usually what you ran into, especially in the first dungeon area. You had about 3 to 5 little goblins, or 2 to 3 with one of the larger goblins, and between the combat system and your character stats, you're just not designed to survive that, and that's kind of required to get through the game. Again, nothing I had an issue with can't be fixed with either a patch or just dedicating a few hours of grinding out levels in the early game. Overall, the various spells you can unlock in the talent tree system do complement the combat system well, and they do help enhance the combat aspects of the game. So ultimately the question would be whether or not I recommend this title. The short answer is yes. The Tales meets visual novel aesthetic, coupled with the Kingdom Hearts meets Neptunia combat, make for an interesting title. Despite my frustrations with the combat system, it didn't break the experience for me, and I look forward to sinking my teeth back into this title when it comes out of early access here in April. Just be warned that you may want to take some time and grind out a few levels in the early game just to make your adventure a bit more manageable. This has been Alan here with Media Moogle saying sayonara, and see you in the next review. Be sure to check out MediaMoogle.net or YouTube.com/MediaMoogle for game reviews, gaming podcasts, and more.